Hi, I'm Ben. I just started, so I'll just do like a quick introduction so that we can get a little comfortable with each other. The main reason why I invited you to do this interview is because I was just initially doing the content creation for fun, and it turns out I really enjoy doing what I'm doing, and I kind of want to kick it up a notch. So I wanted to reach out to you, and you're the first person that I wanted to interview because you basically, from your early work, from what I can tell or what I've seen, you kind of started off doing what I'm basically doing now, and you're just on a whole nother level now that you're here, and so yeah, so I thought you'd be the best person to contact right now, and I think for as long as I am making YouTube content, I am going to be focusing on the legacy format. So just a quick overview about me and like my history with Magic. Like I've been playing Magic, I would say casually. I've never really had that really competitive drive to ever grind like GPs when they existed, PPTQs or PTQs. Like I participated in them just because my friends did it. But I've never really had that aspiration to like play on the pro tour. It was just more of like a hobby and things to do with my friends and to meet other people. But yeah, I've been playing Magic casually for like more than 10 years. I played all formats. Anytime a new format I heard of, I tried it. But I really started playing Legacy during COVID or right at the end of the pandemic. And I heard these two guys in Toronto that we have this Legacy of the North group that we are that's completely community run. So well, I saw them trying to grow the legacy scene in Toronto, and I really liked what they were doing. So I sold all of my commander cards, everything. I sold everything from like standard, pioneer, modern, unless it was being seen play at legacy at the time. Sold out of everything, so I picked up basically four legacy decks at the time, and that's how I got started. How I got started in content creation. That's a much shorter story. It was, I believe, at the beginning of the summer of 2023. My friend, he picked up a camera one day and was just like, "Hey, let's just record this match and see how it goes." And when we were looking at the footage, there was glare everywhere. You could only see half of the board. People were cutting in and out of sound, and it wasn't the greatest. But I was like, okay, maybe I can do a little better if I have the camera in my hand. So went out very impulsively, bought a camera, and yeah, I haven't looked back. So that's just history about me. Why don't you introduce yourself to my audience and how you kind of started with your history of Magic, and then if you started off as like a player, and then how you wound up in content creation.
Yeah, so I have only been playing Magic for about a decade, which means, relatively speaking, I am kind of a baby when it comes to it. Started in college after I had grown tired of other games and just got immediately hooked. I think I was playing Standard for about a year, if even that. Modern for 6 months, and then after that, I just dove into Legacy, and have been playing that since then. Kind of off the back of watching, like back in the heyday when Star City Games would have their Saturday morning Standard, Sunday morning Legacy opens, and every day I'd just be there. I'd be watching, and from there, the rest is kind of just history. I think fell in love with my favorite deck of probably all time. Sensei's Dividing Top, Counterbalance, Miracles, that good stuff. And then honestly, after that, well, it's kind of funny. I would say that it's a simple story, but it really isn't. I got into content creation in the weirdest way, and it's one of those things where like my competitive drive really had me playing Magic the Gathering at all strange hours, right? Like when you have access to an online platform like Magic Online, like you get to play at your leisure. And what ended up happening was I just kept asking people, like, at like 11 a.m., 3 p.m., 2 a.m., just like, hey, like, what about this play from this game? What do you think about this? And people were just like, at some point, I guess maybe they just got tired of me. They were just like, hey, why don't you just turn on the broadcast and we'll just watch your entire match? And I was like, you know what? That's not a bad idea. And so that's how I turned my first stream on. And after that, I think I was kind of hooked. I mean, kind of like how you're saying, right? It's very addicting. It's very the idea of, being able to talk to people, the social element, while also getting to play Magic is it's honestly just an amazing marriage of like two incredible things that I like a lot. So, I mean, it's very natural, right? And then after that, like it was kind of just like the day in, day out. I would basically just stream Legacy. For the most part, it was honestly almost just like my one deck too. And eventually I started branching out. And then, COVID happened. And I think in 2022, when, we had our first event back like in person and IMO, that was like, the SCG Con in Philly up where is it called? Like Valley Forge,
Yeah.
so that's the first event that I went to, and part of me but like disgruntled because everyone was like, oh, Star City Games, they used to have like every week of the year they would have some sort of content, and then they came out and they said like, hey, we're done with coverage. It's just not in the books for us, and a lot of people were not happy with that, honestly, right? And I was one of them. And I was unhappy enough that I said, you know what? All right, we go to Amazon, have my phone. We're going to buy like a selfie stick and I'm just going to clamp it onto a table for 9 hours and hope that that's good enough. And, honestly, the reality is it was not. But that's how I got started with coverage, we'll call it.
Mm-hmm.
After that, it was just another event, another improvement, another event, another improvement. And, every day you come back and you're just like, all right, well, this is nice that I got to do one new thing, but I want to make it better. And that's an impossible, like a Sisyphean task. Like you will never ever actually get there, but it's the journey, right? Like seeing yourself grow is always great. Seeing the product grow is great. Seeing how much of a difference it makes to just all the people that are consuming that content is also incredible. And then at some point, I kind of just kept going to different events. And I was in the right place at the right time, and I met John Carter, who is basically like the head honcho of all sort of like the DreamHack RC content and organizations. And he was like, "Hey, we've seen what you've done. You want to make the RC broadcast for us?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm in, absolutely." And then along the way, it was just like more of the same, right? Just rinse, repeat. Broadcast, iterate, improve, broadcast, iterate, improve, broadcast, iterate, improve. And honestly, I'm still in that loop. And we're here today where I think what we've got going on is pretty cool, but there's always stuff to do better too.
Yeah, I guess that kind of segues nicely into a question that I just popped into mind is when you're talking about, you're now in this loop of constantly reiterating. It's like very much like when you bring like a new product out of product design, you always release it, you have it tested, you make sure it's usable. Once it's usable, you want to make sure it does what it does, and then can it be better, right? And that's where the loop forms, and it's like, how do we constantly make this better for the viewer? How is it better for anyone involved? So I guess that leads me to the question: is do you still love doing it, and like, why do you still do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is definitely yes. To the point where, like, long term, if I had a goal, it'd probably just be like, hey, all right, quit my day job and just do this thing full time. The real world doesn't work that way, but that would be ideal. It's just fun, honestly. Like I enjoy the tasks, I enjoy the puzzle, I enjoy what it means to actually bring this kind of content to a lot of people, right? Like there's nothing like, after the finals of a 2-day event, somebody is exhausted. They're like, all right, I just won. This feels great. And then they go back home and they watch it and they're just like, yeah, this was my moment, right? Being able to capture that, being able to immortalize that, it means a lot to them. And it also just means a lot to all the people who are watching, just for people like you and me who are just as invested in Magic, who want to see like, okay, like, these are historic moments. What's going on? I want to know, and being able to provide that to them it's honestly invaluable, in the scope of our community and things like that. So it's important and it's fun, and that's great.
Yeah, I guess riffing off of that, it's hard for me to kind of wrap my mind about that because my scope is so small, right? I think my first video that I ever published on the YouTube channel was I think it was in June. I think it was like either late or mid June, and because I only film like our local meta and like any local events, it's hard for me to kind of wrap my head around about like how many people globally like watch this. And I think just recently I checked for the very first time like YouTube viewership analytics, and there's so much data there that I was completely overwhelmed. But seeing how many people are watching from overseas, it was way more than I was expecting, and that made me kind of like really really happy. So yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. I
Mhm.
went to Prague last year to go and cover their Eternal Weekend for Europe, and the number of people that were just like, "Hey, thanks for the content. Hey, thanks for all this legacy stuff." It's jaw dropping. Like this is the one thing that I will say is like I have learned over time you're being watched. People see you, and it is a little bit scary when you think about it. But then what like the actuality is like when you actually get to like transcend like that the barrier of the internet, you meet the people that you're consuming your content. It's an awesome feeling. It's an awesome feeling.
Yeah. So I guess this is also a nice segue, but I found out like looking like listening to all of these different podcasts how infrequently people actually get to enjoy Legacy. I found that like in Southern Ontario here, we are very privileged when it comes to Legacy format. Like if you really wanted to, you could play Legacy every single day for like almost an entire month. Other than like Saturdays, there'll be like alternating Saturdays where there's like 1Ks or 3Ks. But from Sunday to Friday, if you really wanted to play Legacy, it's only like maybe a 2 hour drive from anywhere. So that really like skewed my perspective. I was like, why aren't people playing Legacy? Like, I just never occurred to me because we play it so often that when you go to a place like Eternal Weekend, like everyone was just having so much fun playing Legacy. I'm like, why isn't this just like it's just like an upscaled event for us coming from Toronto? So I think that's partly why I really, really, really want to like take that next level into making sure the content is as high quality as I possibly can make it. Because I really want to share, this passion with everybody else, right?
Yeah. At this point, it's kind of like your job, for the people that don't get to experience legacy the way you do the best that you can so that they can live vicariously through you. So I think it's a pretty good task, albeit a difficult one that you're taking up, but it is important for sure.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to know like how's legacy in your area. Like, you don't have to disclose like where you're located or anything, but like
That's a good question,
how does your
actually.
location like affect even just like because I know you mentioned earlier that a lot of the time you spend, especially in your early days, like playing Magic was through Moto, right? That's because
Mhm.
it's just so accessible and you can play whenever you want. But if you really wanted to play like paper Magic, if you still do, like how does your area kind of affect that? I guess it's like demographics and stuff.
Yeah, so it's funny enough. I actually this is a little bit tragic, but I don't get to play too much Magic nowadays. When it comes to Legacy, it's mostly I'm just playing on stream kind of deal, which is honestly like I enjoy that the most. But I also appreciate hanging out with my friends. Like locally, we have the old CFB shop.
Mm.
And they have their occasional 1Ks, 2Ks that'll go by to just hang out with people, watch them play some games. Usually I'll be doing some coverage sort of thing, but at this point I've played so much that like I well this there's a lot to unpack here, but basically I'm kind of at the point in my Magic journey where like I'm okay with just like not playing as much Magic as I used to, because there's just other things that are as important, as fun that I'm working on instead. So the sad answer is, I'm not playing too much, but I'm still very much so, integrated into the community, which for me is like more important than anything else. Just all my friends that I've made throughout this time, and I get to play on Magic Online too, especially when I'm streaming. Right, like it's pretty cool stuff. So yeah, kind of not maybe not the answer you're looking for, but
Mm.
is not as bad of a reality for me when it comes to playing Legacy. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was the like that was basically exactly what I was not what I was hoping that you'd say because when someone takes a step back from playing, it's always like, oh no, we lost another good one. But you know, you're still focused on content creation and you still yearn to be part of the community. It's not like you're one of the people who's like, oh, I have two kids, I'm gonna move on with my life, not gonna touch these cards again. Might as well just either keep them for my kids if they want to play or just sell them off and move on. So I'm glad to hear that you still really really want to be part of the community. That's fantastic, and it's great news for all of us who want to watch legacy coverage for these big events. So it's great news for us as a content creator, whether it be on Moto, if it's Arena, or if it's paper coverage. Magic is not the greatest for viewing. So if you compare it to like other games that are I think are great for viewing, so if you want to say like League of Legends, Dota, any of the fighting games, like CS:GO, like any shooters, CS:GO, Valorant, Fortnite, you name it, all of those you can kind of like leave it off to the side and you can just look at it or watch it or listen into it however you want. And anytime you look into it, you can kind of understand what's going on, right? So like, have you ever felt this way, or does your point of view differ?
Um, yes and no. I'm kind of in the same pickle that you're in, which is I agree. There's a significant learning curve to Magic, and to really appreciate what's going on in the games, you must be some degree involved, right? It's not like where you can be completely, out of the loop on what's going on in the game, turn on a broadcast and then see like characters like, battling and against each other, and you understand, oh, this person took a hit, that means they're losing, and you can see like an HP bar that's low and that means they're losing, right? Like that's not how Magic works, right? Like you could be at one life, you could have 19 cards in hand, and someone might be like, hey, you're losing, and you're actually like, I know I'm winning this, and it's not even close, right? Like Magic is certainly complicated. I don't have a solution to this puzzle quite yet, but I do have a lot of hope here, and I think this goes two directions. The first is to figure out what elements besides the game makes a broadcast exciting. So I think this is something that Cedric has talked about. Cedric Phillips has talked a lot about before, and that's like for any broadcast, it doesn't matter what the game is. It's never about the actual game itself. It's about the
Mm.
personalities that you're using to sort of color and highlight and really paint the picture there, right? It's the people that
Mhm.
make the game. It's the people that make the broadcast. It's the people that keep everybody interested. And so that's the first thing.
Okay.
Second thing is a little bit of inspiration from like chess. Chess is another game that is just as complicated, and for some reason, chess has managed to pop off in this world, right? Like, like if you look at Twitch, chess on Twitch, like there's a significant viewership, and it's not like chess is a simple game either, right?
Mhm.
So you have to ask yourself, like, what's going on with chess? Why is it possible for people to really get into watching chess and not into watching Magic? And when you look at that, right, you have to kind of tell yourself, well, I mean, it's not the complexity. I mean, the complexity to a degree matters, but there's something else, and I think it has to do with the way that we're presenting the game to a cold audience that has never seen it before. We don't really have a way to tell the story very well. I think that's the big thing, right? I remember watching a video by Moist Critical where he was going through, these are, I'm gonna go to like 100 different streamers, I'm gonna donate them like some amount of money, and one of them was actually a Magic streamer, and he was like, I really like watching this guy. You can't really tell what's going on here, but there's this card and it's gonna kick this person's butt, and there's this card that they're gonna play to try to save themselves, but this guy's got this thing and that's why he's gonna. And he just like he put it in a very very like 2 cents situation where like you could be just watching the video and you would understand what's going on. You could like understand like the dynamic, like the shift in power and the back and forth, right? It's possible to teach Magic, but I don't think anyone's really doing it too well. And to really, in order to actually do that, would require some sort of like radical redefinition of what Magic coverage or content is supposed to look like. And I think it's also maybe potentially just even more conducive to like post-produced content as well, where it's just like you have a way to sort of really dial in on how you want to present the story and what details you want to highlight to get people who don't really know what's going on invested in the game.
I think that's something where I really suffer with my content is although I am, trying my best to present this legacy content is I've never like my background is definitely not an artistic or creative side. I come from very like my background is cognitive psychology. So the way I work is like everything's like very like input output. This is the way things go. This is how things are. Um, yeah, I've never had any experience kind of like creating or drawing this narrative, utilizing people's personalities or like the way you mold and sculpt people's kind of stories. So and I had one comment on YouTube who suggested like, yeah, this guy has shown up several times in this one event. You should really push that narrative. And I was like, I don't understand what you mean by pushing this narrative. And that's something I'm completely inexperienced with, and it's something that I'd love to learn if that's what people are interested in, right?
Yeah, that is a tricky thing, but I think what I have learned is that the magic, like the game itself, can only be so interesting, and at some point you have to find another element to really drag people in. And generally speaking, the easiest thing. Okay, so like I had a talk with Cedric a long time ago when I first started making broadcasts and things like that, and I was like, hey Cedric, you have any advice? And Cedric said, okay, yeah, here's one thing that you can possibly do. I'll give you two options. The first is if you want to make your content exciting, you find crazy decks and you just highlight like, oh, like check this out, right? This is like a new deck playing like this new card from this new set. Great. Awesome. There's a problem with this, right? And that's that you would need a reliable source of new content every time you run a broadcast. But Magic doesn't work that way, right? You could be playing the best deck in the room and you can lose in your first two rounds and you're out of the tournament, right? Like you have no way to guarantee that your cool cards are going to show up later on in the tournament or later on in the broadcast or whatever it is. So Cedric said there's another option, and that's just focusing on the people, right? And when you turn someone into a superstar and you put them on the TV every day, people are going to watch to see how they're doing because they're just invested in that person, invested in that personality. And you could tell which one Cedric chose for Star City Games, pre-pandemic. Like they had the Players Championship, and it was fantastic. It worked out very well. I think they did a great job, turning these average people into superstars, into people that were now household names, and then also leveraging that spotlight factor to drive people to their events, to play in their tournaments, and just overall improve their brand awareness and all the sorts of things that you would want out of a broadcast.
So I mentioned that I'm part of like the community run Legacy of the North group that was started by two guys, and like we've grown substantially, and I think that's kind of the way we've been going is we're trying to it's nowhere close to like SCG and its player championship, and it's something that we kind of aspire to, or at least what I aspire to. I know the other two guys, they just want to make Legacy as enjoyable and as accessible and fun for everybody as possible, but this is something that I really want to share with the rest of the world. But yeah, so I can definitely see the two problems. I guess the main problem with the first suggestion that Cedric kind of brought up to you, and that was like highlighting these crazy, wacky, interesting decks. And it's really funny because this is something I try to highlight when I'm selecting matches. Everyone always comes up to me. They're always like, hey, like, put me on camera, put me on camera, put me on camera. And, for the first few rounds, they don't understand. Like, no, the first round is almost always like randomized. Like, we have no idea who's going to go up. That one's going to be completely random. And then as the game, or as the day goes on, we go and lean more towards the lower end to the mid record players, right? And that's because we want to showcase, because so the way we do it, the reverse thinking is that the people that are doing well, you're going to see them later. That's just how a tournament bracket works. So we'll feature them later, which is why I want to focus on the lower to mid end people. And when I have judges or TOs sending me matches, they kind of just don't understand that. So I guess it's just a different way of thinking that's not commonly used.
Yeah, I understand what you're coming from, and that's sort of the same strategy that we adapt for like larger broadcasts, which is, round one. Generally round one you go for like a well-known name. So if I have like Nathan Stoyer, in my event, he's the hook, right? Round 3, 4 later on, we look for the spicy decks that are doing reasonably well, because honestly, anyone can get to 3-0, in a long tournament with anything. Maybe the cards fall the right way, but then you get your chance to, show, like we had Is It Merfolk at the Denver RC, which was great, right? Like that's an archetype you've never really seen before. It raises eyebrows and gets people talking, right?
Yeah.
And then later on, like you mentioned, right, at the end of the day, you are at some point going to have to look at the players that are doing the best. So, maybe you show them, depends on the number of rounds you have, but like you can show them early, maybe once. And then after that, you really want to just save them for like, the day 2 cut or the elimination rounds, or like the playing for that 4-0 at locals where like, you've seen that a couple times. Now, obviously, if there's like a storyline going on, you change this up a little bit. You want to make sure that you include as many elements of that story into the match selection as possible. Like saying like, hey, like, we've got our daily leaderboard or weekly leaderboard, and this player is 5th place. They need 3 points to pass the next person, climb up the ranking. Let's go watch their game and see how they do, that kind of thing, right? So, those are the elements that I think right now that would mostly. I mean, it is realistically like it's a script, right? Like there's really not much you can really deviate from this. Nor do you really need to, because at the end of the day, like these are the things that people care about the most, right? They want to see who's going to make top 8, what decks are doing the best, what decks are the coolest, and then who are the big names, right? That's basically all there is to it. So when it comes to match selection, you're right. You're pretty locked into what you can actually show, with maybe the one exception being like, okay, how does the story overall allow you to deviate from the path and throw in an interesting chapter into your tournament broadcast experience.
Yeah, I guess the way I was thinking was that because you're producing on such a a much larger scale, I thought that things would be done differently. But I guess if we do like a comparison, is I'm only 1 day. If you're doing a 2-day broadcast or a 3-day broadcast, if you want to think about it the same way, the timeline might be a little bit stretched, or you might have a little bit more, but your pool and data that you can grab from is also that much greater, right?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, it was unfortunate because in the Denver RC there were so much, like for modern, way too many Rhinos players, Yawgmoth players, Amulet players, and so we had to like really dig deep to find like someone who was doing well, or like a name on on an interesting deck or with some interesting cards. And yeah, I think what ends up happening is when you compare like a 15-round broadcast to a 4-round broadcast, all that happens is you extrapolate. Like, so round 1 you have like the famous names, so that okay, in the 15-round broadcast it means rounds 1, 2, and 3 you have people playing who are pretty well known, and then round 2 you pick the interesting deck that's like 4, 5, and 6, and like so on like that, right? So the recipe is really there. It's a functional recipe. It works pretty well. And honestly, when it comes to like live streaming match selection, it's a little bit difficult to stray away from that. Now, when you get into like post-production and showing things later on, honestly, like I'm not even sure. Yeah, you could definitely change it up then, but you have to be able to like guide the viewer and make it make sense to them, right? Like convince them that that's something that they want, which is certainly tricky.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know how much time you set aside, so I'm going to just push this a little bit along. So the next topic I kind of wanted to touch on was the topic that I specialize in, or the format that I specialize in, is Legacy. So obviously you've run some pretty big events. Have you ever like run into this kind of situation or this way of thinking? And if you have events that have been like hugely successful, so I know like Eternal Weekend that passed, I saw that you were running the show and you looked like the hardest guy working there. You were like almost at all times you were like the only one behind the desk. And do you have like memorable events of like the larger ones that you've broadcasted and set up? And have you seen Legacy dwindle like over the past few years, ever since like the pandemic? Because I know that there's like a lot of the prices spiked during that initial lockdown, where everyone was just constantly buying cards.
Yeah, so I will say, Legacy will always forever be in that tight spot. There's just logistics that are beyond all our controls, and so I think what's important then is to focus on what we can affect. And to answer your first question, I mean, yeah, like when it comes from event to event, honestly, at some point, like the format doesn't matter as much. When I'm in the back seat, I usually don't even get to watch the matches. I'll be staring at like cards moving on the table, but I'm not actually like processing what's going on in the thing, because
yeah, I know that exact feeling.
Yeah, right. You're just focusing on 100 different moving objects at the same time, and so the last thing you get to do is actually sit relaxed and watch the match. But in terms of what I would think about for Legacy, there's a specific content creator, anzidmtg, who honestly is really inspirational. When you watch his videos and you see how he attacks this problem, he makes a bunch of Legacy videos, he makes a bunch of vintage videos, and he turns every single video that he creates into a story. And so I wonder, like if maybe that's the easiest way to really get Legacy to appeal to the audience. That we, they don't necessarily need to play. Obviously, like if people are able to play, then they're going to be, much more incentivized to like invest into the format and watch the cards. However, for like a popcorn format where you're just like, casually watching and enjoying. If the story is compelling, people will watch, right? And Harry definitely knows how to make very compelling stories, right? He'll set up a challenge and then he'll talk about his strategy, how he takes it down. Because at the end of the day, we're all Magic players and we're all sort of like wired in that same fashion of like, okay, here's a puzzle, I have to solve it. How do I solve it? What are the clues?
Yeah.
What am I going to do? Right? Like all that sort of stuff. And so it's really the element of storytelling, and every single piece of content that you create can tell the story in some way. And that's something that I think is very important, right? So earlier I said, like, for tournament broadcast, right? Like, what's the story, right? Well, you have these players and they're the story. Well, okay, from Harry's perspective, when it comes to these one-off videos, what's the story, right? It's how do I do this crazy cool thing that I'm trying to do? And that also rewinds back to what we were talking about, right? So it really is a matter of presentation and how you do that. And then even when we talk about things like Commander, right? Like, what's the story there, right? Well, you have 4 very, very awesome personalities that are, just, they're not even playing the game. They could literally be playing like checkers for all I care, and just listening to them talk and sort of just like, banter and have fun. That's what the video is really for, right? More than anything else. Like, cool, this is a game of Magic, but like, you could do anything with those 4 people and people would still continue to watch, right? So I think when it comes to Legacy specifically, that's the kind of situation that I would try to build up. Now, admittedly, I have sort of like pivoted into Modern just as another, attempt to sort of grow, expand my audience, really reach those that, I think when it comes to like constructed Magic, right? Like paper Magic, like Modern might be the largest, like tournament format. I don't know if there's a better way to describe that, but expanding into that is also just kind of important thing to do for someone like me who's trying to like, turn this into a full-time business kind of deal, right? Mm-hmm. But when it comes to Legacy, it's kind of just like, yeah, all right, like pick up the paintbrush, figure out what you want to say, and then, make sure that whatever you're painting is along those lines. So even if it's like tournament broadcast, right? Like, let's say it's like, round 4 and you've got your narrative set up where it's like, all right, there are points on the line here for the leaderboard status, but then also let's take a look at the match here, and it's like, show and tell against this Delver deck, and what does show and tell try to do, right? You put a graphic up of the card show and tell and sneak attack, and you say, hey, we need to get these 2 cards onto the stack, but wait, Delver has Forcible, they've got Pyroblast, they've got Daze, all these blockades, and it's going to be pretty challenging to see how they actually go about it. And then you spend the entire match, like, broadcast after you're just talking about like the strategically, you drive that narrative as hard as you can and really like, tell like some sort of story. And yeah, so it's interesting. I guess that would be how I would go about making Legacy more accessible, because I think the elements that are out of our control, quite simply, they're just out of our control. So focus on what we can do, and if that works, awesome. And sometimes it might not work, and you just move on. You go on to something else, or you've tried another strategy, or you find another idea, or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I guess I'm curious. You mentioned that you're kind of leaning more in towards Modern, and kind of expanding, and you want to reach that broader audience, and that's because for you want to turn this into like as close as possible to a like full-time content creator, right? And for me, I've never had that really like aspiration. Like, it would be really cool, I guess, like it would be like a distant dream if I could like just live like a semi comfortable life and just make content for a Legacy. That would be fantastic. But I guess like my question is like, because I know, and that I'm like coming to terms with Legacy, being so niche. Have you ever been like put into a position where like you need to sacrifice like kind of what you really, really want to be doing to kind of thrive and expand on what you want to be doing? And I guess that's kind of very similar to what you're saying, is like, hey, you might really, really love Legacy like more like above every other format, but you have to come to terms that Modern is more popular, it's more accessible for people, more people are going to tune in, you're going to grow, and you'll just help Modern grow with you. So I guess my question is like, do you sacrifice to thrive?
I think so. I mean, obviously, if you get really lucky and everything works out, cool, you don't have to. But I find that to be pretty hard, especially from the perspective of someone who's like super passionate about Legacy specifically. I mean, the problem is like your audience, there's only so much, right? And because it's a small audience, it's very easy for that space to get saturated. And I would even say, like, to a degree, that there's a reasonable amount of saturation with, like some of the names that you mentioned earlier. From my perspective, it also just matters on what like your goal is as well. Like my goal is, to be as big as possible, or maybe not even, that's not true. My goal is to just make a reasonable paycheck out of this, right? Which, in order to do that, like, you just have to think of it like a business, right? And so if you do something and it's not driving in enough money, I mean, you'd be insane to only keep doing that, right? Like, to not change. And so I think it really depends on what your individualized goals are. If your goal is to really spread legacy to the world, then yeah, you just stick to it and you find different ways to tell the same story. If your goal is to, something like mine, then yeah, you cut your losses and, just find something else that'll help you with that goal. So, I mean, like, from your perspective, if I asked you like what your goal was, you'd probably say it's something along the lines of just sharing the legacy experience with a lot of players, right?
Yeah, I guess like in terms of my content creation, I probably would say trying to get into your shoes, and then my greater aspiration is to have my legacy community at least try to get somewhere in the same realm of running. I wouldn't say as similar of a size as a Eternal Weekend, but something huge that people would like overseas would want to travel to. And
Yeah.
realistically, I can't see a pathway there. Like, it's just there's three of us trying to run this community, and trying to get from here to there just seems impossible. Like, there seems like so much in the way. But those are like my aspirations, and we all have to have dreams. So those are goals that were and targets that I want to be shooting for. Whether or not my colleagues share that same sentiment is very different. I think what they want to be doing is they just don't want to be losing money while we're putting up prizes.
Yeah. And I think that's what it boils down to as well, right? You really, like, if your goal is to have something so incredible that people will travel across the country or across the world to visit, you really have to figure out, like, okay, what is that? So for example, I remember back in like 20-ish, right before the pandemic, Missouri MTG, like Jeremy Aronson was about to put out like a $40,000 legacy event. This was right after SCG was like, "Hey, Pioneer's the new thing, and we're no longer doing legacy events." And so Jeremy was like, "All right, well, let's do one big legacy event." And people were like, "Okay, that's an eyebrow raiser." So if you find out like if that's the goal that you need to do, you gotta just like start treating it like a business, like ASAP, right? Because then okay, well, that means now I need like $50,000 to like set up the venue, set up the prizes, set up the caster, set up the internet, set up all that sort of stuff, right? And then you work backwards from there, and like it gets tricky, like figuring out like the revenue models for these sorts of things. But when it comes to making content, money is always going to be a tie-in. It's always going to be something that's like right next door. You will always have to think about it, even if you don't want to. Even if for something like as small or as large as like a from like the local broadcast side that you're talking about, like prize support, like that's something that you got to get somebody to come in and help out with over time, because otherwise it's coming out of your pocket. Or like a regional championship. From my end, I'm just like, okay, well, I have to pay employees now. Like, what's the strategy for that? Where is this money coming from, right? So it's tricky. It is certainly tricky. And then at the end of the day, content is a business, and to get to the goals, you really have to make a plan and just like figure out what you want to do to achieve it. And I would definitely say to anybody who's listening to this, like, if your goal is to create content, or if you have like any goal in general, like just make a business plan for it and follow it, right? It's especially true for content. I'll just put it that way.
Okay, well, I won't hold you any longer. Hopefully we can schedule another time to continue this and just finish off like the more case scenarios. That'd be great. So if you want to give a shout out on where everybody can find you and you want to do your plugs and stuff, yeah, you have the floor is yours.
Yeah, just Twitch and Twitter and YouTube and Instagram, anzidmtg everywhere. Simple.
Cool. So thank you very much for joining me today. Hopefully we'll have a part 2, and I will put all of those links in the description below. Thank you, Anuraag, for joining us, and have a good night, everybody.